Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People's podcast with Cole and Scott.
Today's guest, John Izenstark.
Thanks to our sponsors, Orgnostic. Fast track the insights behind your people data using Orgnostic by connecting all your HR data in one people analytics platform. Quickly uncover the insights you need to measure the success of your people initiatives. Orgnostic is the most innovative people analytics, generative AI, data orchestration, and employee listening tool on the market. To learn more, book a demo at orgnostic.com/directionallycorrect.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you get to like Fast and Furious 8. It's like, what are we doing here?
See, and I've never even seen. Oh, I take that back. I saw Fast and the Furious 3 Tokyo Drift. Just because, I'll tell you why. It's kind of like the He-Man thing. It's because I like the soundtrack. I was listening to the music. I was like, well, I'll go watch this movie because I like the music.
I was dragged to Fast and Furious 1, and like on the 47th car race scene, I was like, I leaned over to my friend Jenny. I was like, what the fuck are we doing here?
I'll be honest with you, I don't understand car racing, period. Like, I don't understand NASCAR or Formula One or like drag racing or any, like, I've always, this will tell you everything you need to know. My first car was a minivan.
Yeah,
you're
me
not
too.
supposed to get a minivan until you have children, and I had a minivan.
Well, check this out. I drove my mother's blue Astro van to school, and my friend David, he had a black Astro van, but he put D-Man across the top, and we would race it, our Astro vans.
That's Fast and the Furious combined with my first car together.
What's up, John?
Hey there.
We're talking about kind of how the Fast and the Furious franchise jumped the
This is
shark.
what I was worried about.
Yeah. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Do you have any crazy high school experiences, John, that you care to share publicly?
Yeah, there was a lot in that sentence. Crazy high school publicly. I did not drive an Astro van. I had a fantastic Grand Am that had been passed down in generations of my family, and I was very. It took me a while to realize you could open it up. Like, and by open it up, I mean like 40.
Like the back end shakes, like when you get to 40.
Yep. Oh no, it was bad. It was everything shook. Everything shook like right around 35, and then at 40 it was rearing, burning oil, burning whatever. But no, there was nothing good. I am trying to envision though 2 Astro vans gunning it.
You haven't seen anything like it, clearly.
Well, my very first job out of college was working as a manufacturing engineer for an auto parts manufacturer, a tier 1 auto supplier. And so at one point I got put on a plane with no experience and no real understanding. I jumped on a plane and flew to Baltimore where those vans are built, and super nice people. And the first words out of their mouth were, "Thank God you're here." And the first thought in my head was, why? And they were having trouble getting these things off the production line. And I pretty much took one apart. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I just figured, all right, well, let's just dive in. And with the help of a couple of folks, I took apart an Astro van and spread the parts all over this big, part of the production floor. And I'm looking around at it, and looking really like, oh yeah, I know what I'm looking at. I did actually find the problem, but it wasn't because I knew what I was looking for. It's just because I literally tripped over it. It was a wiring harness with a cut in it, and I did actually trip over it and notice that that was where the short was. But that's my only Astro van experience, is that I took one apart.
Fresh eyes, clearly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You were like a mechanical engineer? Like, wait, how did they say, like, come on, John?
Well,
we need you on this production line right now.
I'm an industrial engineer, which means I have an engineering degree in applied math. So there were lots of questions about sending me there. One, industrial engineer, not a manufacturing engineer. And what they really needed was an electrical engineer, and I wasn't that either. There's another story about me, my next job was actually running production lines for a company that made slot machines, and we were and video games. and I was in Council Bluffs, Iowa, with another bunch of people on my team, and these machines, we were rolling out a brand new product. The machines weren't working, and this other guy was a mechanical engineer, and there was me, an industrial engineer. We were looking at a multimeter, trying to figure out how to connect this multimeter to a video game. And we're like, which one's red? Which one's yellow? Like, we had nothing. We were like, it was, and the customer's just like staring at us, like, what do you do? We're like, oh yeah, we know what we're doing. We're just, I don't know. We're making sure the multimeter is, clean. I mean, so why employers would send me on these trips to fix things. We fixed that too, by the way, now that I think about it. But why they would send me to fix these things, I think has more to do with the fact that I ended up in sales and I can project confidence when I have none. So that would, I think, be the answer. But yeah, those are not the worst. Those are not the worst stories about me trying to fix something that I had no idea what was going on. But there seems to be a bunch of them.
So John, I want to come back to the engineering point, but you're really throwing me off with this mug. So what's going on here? What you drinking on, man?
This is coffee, cup number 2 for the morning. I don't know. There's nothing. What is it? It's got a lid. Oh, it is from a vendor who I'll leave it covered because they're not sponsoring your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you kindly.
To me, it's just a mug, but is something about this mug, relevant to your, you're like, oh, it looks like this or something. What's the story?
No, it's just you're holding it really close to your face.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
No, it's cool, man. Well, I'm curious. So I do want to come back though to the engineering point. So how does a engineer ultimately end up in HR or in people analytics or in IO psychology, or you kind of take that where you want to go with it?
Okay. Well, at least we have time. So let's see.
You want to introduce John before we get too deep into this? Would that be
better? Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. And maybe that'll tee up your answer.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got John Izenstark with us, former AWS, former CEB, former Volterra. He's worked with some really cool people in the IO space like Nancy Tippins, Ben Snyder, Dick Jenneret, and Bill Macy. For our IO listeners out there, they'll know that's like some of the greatest hits, folks. Currently consulting with an HR tech firm on the go-to-market strategies as a chief revenue officer. Fun fact, he was at Game 7 of the World Series where the Cubs won, which a really interesting, good place to be, by the way. But yeah, welcome and thank you so much for joining us, John.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I think that John is one of the most plugged in guys I know. Like he somehow found me where I work. And I think he just kind of bounces around and like scrapes ideas from various folks. Like you hear about like Steve Jobs, like he was famous for bouncing around Silicon Valley and like being the first to hear information. That's kind of how I see John as well.
Well, that's a skill too. How do you do that, John?
No, I think that's an exaggeration. I just like to talk to interesting people. I'm always asking questions, and I said, where do I find the answers? And there was a guy at AWS who said, wait a minute, you want those answers? Oh, you need to talk to Scotty. And I said, who or what is Scotty? And they're like, oh, he's an IO psychologist. He's over here. He's doing amazing work. So yeah, that's, I mean, I think, I like learning new things. And I like talking to people who know more than I do. So that's just sort of that's kind of how I end up connecting with folks around.
And the legend of Scotty grows.
Yeah,
that's what I know.
Yeah, no. Believe me, you were better than advertised.
Oh, like thank you, John. Oh my gosh, we need to have you.
John, you're already here. You don't have to butter us up anymore.
But your background is in sales and people analytics, and like I think that's a realm that obviously has internal focus and external focus. What are the ins and outs of it? What do people know, should know, all this sort of good stuff?
I've always well, this is actually kind of related to what Cole had asked. I didn't intend to be in sales. I had actually always envisioned myself as this manufacturing guy, producing building plants and supply chains and everything. And I came to the realization that what made effective operations was not really about, Six Sigma or continuous improvement, but it was really about leadership, and whether or not the leadership drove success. And so I ended up, it is a longer story, but I ended up taking a job at Valterra, which was a firm of biopsychologists. They worked with like the Fortune 100. It was, if you were a big firm with a pretty well-developed HR function, you were using Valterra for your selection testing or your assessment centers or your employee surveys. And that was kind of the stretch of it. But I got to learn a lot. I really wanted to know about where leaders come from, how leaders are made. How do I replicate other leaders? It never occurred to me that was an HR function at the time. I was in manufacturing. HR was if there was an organization within the business that could slow manufacturing down, chances are it was HR. So I had never had any interest in it, and I just had an opportunity to work with people who were like, "Oh, hey, I wrote this book with Bill Byam called The Assessment Center Method. Maybe you might want to read it." And I got this guy Joe Moses just hands me a copy. I'm sitting there, and it's like this big. It's thin pages, tiny words. But it just gave me an opportunity to ask questions as I learned about these things. And I wanted to learn how to sell because I felt like in my quest to be, CEO somewhere, if I understood how to be a good operations leader and then I understood how to sell business, that's how you got to be CEO somewhere. And lo and behold, I found I just really found what I learned about HR to be really compelling, that they're not just administrative. It's not just how do you slow things down. They have the opportunity to be really, really strategic in the business. And so I just fell in love with it. And then I've always felt that sales should be a force for good. So people should leave an interaction with a seller having learned something, whether they agree with you or not. They should have learned something, and they should have some ideas to chew on. And you should be able to innovate through these communications with customers and innovate at scale. So it's not just a one-on-one type experience. So, and that's why I just continue to work at it, because especially in people analytics and HR technology, I find a lot of people just get locked into the product, not actually how you use it, and it's how you use it which really generates value. So you got to be able to tell stories and help customers determine how they're best gonna, make their human capital a strategic advantage. Because if you're just buying a piece of technology to automate functions you have or to run calculations, everyone else is doing the same thing. And if you're doing it the same thing as everyone else does, one of you doesn't have a strategic advantage over the other. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, I think it's kind of related. I think you had a question for us sort of about this topic. I don't know. Do you want to bring that up, John?
Oh, this is a good question. I mean, Scotty, you're in HR. Cole, you were in HR for a long time. I think HR leaders get fired when something doesn't work. That's when something goes wrong. Well, ideally,
sometimes they don't.
Ideally, you lose your job if things aren't working, but they get promoted though, or at least I think they should get promoted if they bring something to the business. They bring a capability to the business they didn't have before. And you're right. I don't think it's always true, but I find when I talk to HR leaders, you've got a small percentage of them that want to bring new capabilities to the business and interact with the business in different ways. The overwhelming majority of HR leaders just want to make sure nothing jumps the rails.
Yeah.
So I find that one of the biggest challenges is giving an HR leader new ideas and new ways to interact with the business, and making them feel confident enough that they are willing to take the risk. And by the way, I'm just thinking through that now that you maybe think about it, Cole. No, I absolutely know folks where things went wrong. They chose a survey vendor and the survey crashed. I can think of a guy, really, he happens to be an IO psychologist, was an executive at a big technology company, really a great guy, chose a vendor and the vendor crashed, and he unfortunately lost his role and went on to actually bigger and better things. But I mean, you do lose it. You do lose. I mean, you have to. There's green fees. There's greens fees. I think where things need to work, but you could probably get by with only providing solutions that give the minimum, and no one thinks the latter of it. They don't get to the point where they're trying to push.
I think that's the point, though. Like some things are just run the business. Like people need to be paid. Like the accounting system needs to work. You need people's vacation time needs to be accurately accounted for. Like all sort of stuff. But there's these other sort of like IO sort of like employee listening, employee productivity, these sort of things where we can lean in as IO specifically and help out, make people enrich their lives, make them better at their jobs, these sort of things, which is more experimental. So it's like this sort of duplicitous role that HR leaders must play, depending on your specific part of HR, right?
I think a lot of people do go into HR because it is oftentimes can be a business as usual type of role, right? And it can, but I guess to your point, John, you do have to build a capability to get promoted by the business and be that strategic partner. Maybe not as many people want to get promoted, perhaps, as you might think in these type of functions. I find that, if HR is going to be a strategic partner of the business, it's kind of like getting asked to the dance. Like they have to want to dance with you and you have to want to dance with them. And that's the only way the match gets made. And so I think that's where the real magic can happen in terms of building strategic capabilities for the business.
I agree. And I actually think, but I'll add one more thing. I think that the other trap that we fall into, and I think technology has helped us fall into this trap, is we think about a solution across the entire business rather than the needs of individual, internal customers. So I have a great story. As a very good friend of mine was in charge of people analytics for like a 30 or 40,000 person business. She did all the things that were necessary, attrition and survivability and all the things you're supposed to do in those roles and provide those dashboards. And she's sitting there talking to, part of their supply chain organization. And they're just like, yeah, we like the dashboards, we follow the data, but it doesn't change our decision. It doesn't impact us. It tells us when things have gone wrong. How do we, we're really interested in how do we reduce our incident rates on the warehouse floors? How do we keep not what our attrition rate is, but how do we keep the people that are better performers? And these are things that are really relevant to that very narrow slice of the business. And so she's like, oh, well, we have all that data. Actually, we have survey data, and we have demographic data and all this stuff that we can look at and start to tease out needs. But because and they were really successful. The end of the story is very successful, great insights, business, that part of the business performance metrics went way up, and the executive who ran it said it was because we got actionable, insightful people data to work with. However, she never would have known, and her customer never would have thought to ask whether or not.
People don't know what they want, right?
They don't know what they want. They don't know what people analytics can provide. They're like, oh, people analytics, they provide these nifty dashboards that say my attrition rate is 17% this month. That's all they think. No one knows you can do, organizational network analysis, or no one knows
or what to do with it.
Yeah, or what to do with it. So I do think that some of it is being able to provide case studies that are easily understood, not just on an average, so this is part of selling, right? It's not just to say, hey, we have a new widget, but here's how you could seamlessly use this widget to make your business better, and here's some steps you can take. And when you're internal, I think it's even more important to be able to say, look, here's the mechanism that you're going to get from, this outcome from this data, and use it in this way. And as the vendor side, Cole, I do think that customers need that. They don't, we because not everyone can have an account management system like AWS where, every customer's got like 7 people they draw upon. We've got to be able to give some scalable techniques to customers so that they can take the data they've got and then know what to do, what the next round to do with it is. That's just my opinion, but I do think I think we're getting there. It's tough.
You know, as I mentioned, like John is super plugged in. He's also a techie. He loves all the advanced analytics, all this sort of great stuff. Well, what do you see as the next big thing? Like you got AI, Gen AI, this sort of thing. Where does this fit in? What's coming next? What are you hearing?
God, that's a good question. I think there are two things that are going to be important. They're going to be the underpinnings of other advances that we haven't come up with yet. The first is generative AI, although generative AI has actually been around a long time. Like the things that you could, the things that people are talking about with generative AI, there are people that have already made that happen. Whether it's internal, like at Amazon, or whether you're a vendor, a lot of those capabilities, aren't actually that much easier to implement with generative AI as it was to do with regular AI. If you wanted to implement those features, you could have done it already. But what I do think generative AI is going to allow us to do is move HR techniques, whether it's analytics or whether it's development or performance, further into the flow of work, so that now, when I'm a seller and I'm slacking my colleague to say, hey, how do I, what should I talk to this customer about, or how do I solve this problem, or who can I connect this person to? Generative AI is going to be able to then say, hey, don't forget, here are some of the thinkers or the opinion leaders you should connect to on this issue. Here's some of the resources we have internally for you to use, and by the way, don't forget to talk about these drivers of service climate. In somewhere in the flow. And I think that's the value we're going to see.
I keep waiting for the AI personal assistants. Like, come on, take over my life, please. I need it so badly.
He's like information on demand / coaching on demand, right?
Yep. And you're going to be able to use that too. Think about performance. Like I don't think anyone talks about. I think the performance management wave is over. But remember when people were talking about performance management? It's this process. We do it once a year. It has nothing to do with it. And no one likes it, and no one likes what they, continually no one likes it. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we talked about it in our last episode.
Really? I'm pretty sure if you were to do it, and if you were to have like a net promoter score of performance management, and don't, I'm just using it as an example. I don't want to talk about NPS, but if I'm pretty sure NPS scores of performance management are the same today as they were 5 years ago when everybody thought we had to change it. I'm fairly certain no one thinks it's any better or any worse than it was before. But if you could integrate development and feedback further up the chain so it's seamless and you're getting in the moment feedback when the defining moments happen, that are the ones that change your opinion or change the way you see your manager or the way you perceive psychological safety. Like if you're able to get that type of feedback at the right time, that's something that generative AI will be able to do easier than traditional AI. And so I think as we evolve the tools we're currently using, that's my hope. So generative AI, I don't think is big. I think it's going to be the applications of generative AI.
Yeah. It's the substrate that everything else is built on.
Yeah, because it'll be easier to build those chains.
I kind of have a selfish question, John, and you're one of the few people out there that I feel like I could ask this to, because you've had both a successful career internally, but also on the vendor side. And I think you're kind of in that transition again right now. How do you do that successfully? It's a really weird transition to make. I think we haven't really talked about it much on the podcast, but I've been internal most of my career, and then I made the transition to external, and it's definitely a different skill set. What has your experience been?
Well, so I've never been internal, although sometimes I fantasize about it. But I've actually never been pure internal. Even at AWS, I ran their HR business, their go-to-market for that. So I do really appreciate HR, and I think part of it is because I came from a background where I had no opinion of HR whatsoever, or I felt like that was like the problem. It was like, oh my God, this is awful. And so I wanted to fix it. I wanted to fix HR. That that was probably one of the reasons I became so ingrained in this field. Was I'm like, how do I make HR work better? How can I help them?
Very noble goal. Yes.
Yeah. Well, no, more like arrogant. Just these. Back then I felt like I knew better. Back then I just felt like I knew better.
It's like a grad student coming out of school. Like,
yeah,
everyone's been doing it wrong. It's time for me to come in.
Absolutely. No, that's 100%. After CEB, CEB bought Valterra, and then I started. I raised some money and I started a business called Culture Factors, and I exited out of that right before the pandemic. Actually, was looking around trying to decide what to do next, and this job at AWS opened up, or they wanted to actually staff it. And so I was very skeptical about going to work for a big company. Actually, the biggest company I had ever worked for was when we sold Valterra to CEB, and they were like 3,000 people. And then we bought SHL, and that was like another 1,000. I had no context for a large organization, but I'm like, all right, I want to give this a shot. And I get to AWS, and I'm like, oh my God, it's huge. It's like no one even knows how many employees they have. And if you were to find out, we can't tell you because it's confidential. It's like the business is 1.6 million. Just go with it. Cast adrift in that sea of people, I latched onto the people that I knew, which are people in HR and people that I have a common frame of reference with. So that's, by the way, how I ended up talking to Scotty, because no one calls the VP of Talent Management just to chat at AWS, because why would you want to? They're in HR. I, though, want to hang out with the people that I knew or that I wanted to know. So for me, HR, honestly, more people, and I can say this for a fact, my time at AWS, I hung out with HR more than I did people on the cloud engineers, because those people and I have similar interests, and I wanted to help. So, but yeah, no, I've never actually been in HR. I will say, I enjoy the consulting I'm doing now. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to go back to, startups or small vendors. I feel like I have one more left in me. I enjoyed all my time at Valterra, every minute of it. I enjoyed my time at Culture Factors, but it does require a different frame of reference.
Well, speaking of your time at Culture Factors, first I wanted to give you a shout out. Thanks for footing the bill a few years ago at a PSYOP party we had. That was a lot of fun. So well done there.
Yes.
But you've been in this space before. I actually came across something this week of a recent meta-analysis on the link between work engagement and job performance, which I know you've spent some time at some firms that were heavily invested in this space. So authors Corbanu and a few others, but it shows that I think for the first time that there's a direct linkage from a meta-analysis standpoint between work engagement, which they define as vigor, dedication, and absorption, and task performance and contextual performance. It looks like the ranges of the R's are about 0.36 to 0.38 on the different kinds of measures. But there's been this age-old debate, of does engagement, cause performance? And I wouldn't say that they're saying that this is a causal mechanism, or is it, performance that causes engagement? But I think this is pretty solid evidence that at least work engagement matters. And so I thought this might be an interesting thing that for you to see, John, but also Scott, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, it makes intuitive sense, right? So like if you're actually engaged in your job, which is usually broken down into sort of things you talked about, absorption, proud to work here, this sort of thing, you're probably going to perform better. Like you're going to be put into that discretionary effort, and engagement's largely a motivational construct in itself. So, these findings aren't surprising in itself, right?
Oh, it's not the bombshell I thought it was. Oh, my bad. What
No,
do you think, John?
Well, so this research I think has been really good, and I think it's been good and compelling for a long time, to be honest. Although I did actually see that article float by, or someone posted it on LinkedIn. I didn't read it, but I will say that the one thing that people I'm trying to remember an old soapbox speech I used to give. it does depend. The outcomes, I don't think I've ever been in question. I think what's been in question is how you measure it, and whether or not you can be engaged, but being engaged doing something valuable for the business. And because I think you can be highly engaged and not providing any value. That's how, and I think that's that's a conversation to burnout. That's a step to burnout. And I think a lot of people who look at their engagement data, just from the context of the employee survey, they're like, oh, I don't understand. My engagement scores keep going up, but my team just keeps performing the same. Is that good or bad? People get so obsessed with chasing leaders who aren't IO psychologists and aren't in HR. They get so obsessed with chasing a number score, watching it trend, that they forget the context behind the number and how to make better use of it. And in fact, I was just talking to a CEO last week about survey data, which I don't talk about that much anymore, but he was really obsessed. He's a dashboard kind of guy. I'm really obsessed with watching this number go up. If the number's not going up, it must be bad. And I'm like, you need to think about it. You need to think about the data in the context, and you're thinking about aggregate data. And I would argue that 88 on some scale is really the same as 80 and could really be the same as 75. Like, just higher is not better. It's higher towards the stuff you want to be doing. And if you've always been, if you're measuring something and it's always been about the same, I think there's a strong argument to say maybe you don't measure that much anymore. Maybe you walk away from it and start measuring things that tend to be more relevant. So, but I do think it's being able to, it's engagement that's relevant to the job at hand and the business at hand. And I think that the future of measurement is going to be and generative AI will help this, although I don't think it'll help that much. But I do think that the underlying technologies that are connecting all our systems together are going to help start to collect data, both predictive and descriptive data from people's jobs that are just outside of survey data and outside of communication data. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of value, where you can get really predictive on where people can be better.
Speaking of value, John, like you were flashing your mug earlier. I mean, you worked in sales and marketing for a while. Like, what's the best piece of swag you've ever received? Anything good?
Ooh, good question.
It is a good question. I'm not going to go get it for you, but I have a bottle of bourbon.
Nice.
That was specialty labeled. It's a good bottle of bourbon, specially labeled by a vendor. It was not me. And I actually have no idea why they gave it to me, to be honest. I would not have wasted I would have not have wasted the kind of money this created on me. But that would be the best swag. It's incredible. I've never
always the humble one, John. Always the humble one.
No, I'm not a buyer. I'm just, I have nothing to buy. So giving me swag doesn't help.
You heard it here, everyone. Don't give John anything good.
There's very little swag in HR. We get a mug every so often, But yeah. I see these like sales folks at every company I've worked for. It's like, wow, this sort of thing. But John, you want to join us in the confusion matrix?
Sure, bring it on.
Let's do it. So, PSYOP 2024 is probably closer than we realize.
Oh my God!
And
where is it?
It's in Chicago. Chicago, my man.
Then I'm definitely going.
So, I mean, to this point, like, people need plans. You're a Chicago native. You lived there, I think, your whole life, right? Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, where do we need to go eat? What's the restaurants of choice here?
Oh, can I even make it a little bit more controversial?
Okay.
Lou Malnati's, Giordano's, Gino's.
Lou's. That's not controversial. Lou's. The only thing controversial about my opinion on deep dish pizza is I think Lou's is the best. And I would rather go for the crumbled sausage rather than the sausage patty.
Interesting. Okay, I don't know if I've ever had that.
Oh yeah, no. It is a massive slab. It is a Texas-sized slab of sausage on top of your pizza. It's just a little too much for me.
Yeah.
But definitely Lou's for deep dish. And you can argue, deep dish versus other forms of pizza. I would argue that it's not something you eat every day. You got to appreciate it's deep dish. If you eat every day, you'll kill yourself. So don't eat it every day, but it is, every once in a while superior to all other forms of pizza.
So let's dig into it. Like, where would we go for like an appetizer? Like, what's the best appetizer in Chicago?
Gosh, best apps in Chicago.
Yeah, we're going to go on an adventure, Chicago adventure.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of great restaurants in the West Loop, for example, which isn't too far away from where I live. I live in River North. Cole, Scott, you haven't lived in Chicago, right? But
I
Cole,
have
you did.
not.
I lived in Chicago for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like the West Loop a lot. I like Haymarket Brewery quite a bit. I like Royster. This is a restaurant in Fulton Market. I like the Publican. All those places have great stuff. One of my favorite bar food places is Jefferson Tap, which won't be too far away from the hotel.
What's your order? What are you getting there?
Michael Cuban sandwich, quesadillas as the appetizer.
Okay.
They make a pretty decent Manhattan for a neighborhood bar, so I might probably get that.
Go there, Illuminati's. What about dessert?
I actually like, this isn't Chicago thing, but I like Jenny's ice cream a lot. I think it's Columbus. I think it's from Columbus, but I really like it. They opened up a couple of restaurants around here. A couple
That's
of like
Midwestern.
retail.
I mean, you still got it.
Yeah.
I was really excited. They actually opened up a Portillo's not too far from me recently, and I've been crushing those hot dogs, man. They're so good.
So I tell you, after the last PSYOP in Chicago, I had the opportunity to stay an extra day. Like I missed my flight, and unfortunately, for the last time, bought a Spirit flight back to Dallas at that time. Never gonna do that again.
Mistake.
Oh yeah. Even though it's only like a 2.5 hour flight, but I walked Field Museum. I'm sitting there on the steps, and you're overlooking what's the name of the park? Grant Park. Is that what it is? Mm-hmm. Grant Park, and they had a hot dog stand. I was like, I've never had a Chicago dog.
Yeah.
And I went and ate one, and it was fucking delicious. It was like so good.
Yeah. Oh no, Portillo's. I was a Portillo's early adopter. I mean, not that early because I think he started it like in the 60s. But he sold it to Warren Buffett. So they've been expanding. They're in Texas now, and Arizona, and California, and Florida. Warren Buffett's private equity firm bought it, and oh my God, it's made like I love going places now, and I'm like, wait, there's a Portillo's. I have to check this out.
I'll say it now, and I'll say it again. Thank you, Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We appreciate you expanding into Texas.
Yep, I had an Italian beef there last week. It'd been the first time I'd been there in at least a year, and I'm like, gosh, I need to come here more often. It's not good for you, but oh my God, it's good for the soul.
Absolutely. Well, you want to do some nerdery? Let's do some nerdery.
Let's do it. You want to kick us off, bud?
Yeah, let me kick us off, and I'm gonna set this up real quick.
If I dominate you on the nerdery scale, do I get like a prize?
I mean, you're probably going to dominate us anyway. So, here, how about this? Next time we get together, I'll buy you a hot dog. How about that?
Thank you. All right.
So I saw something come up. Rob Reiner, which is a guy we've talked about a few times on the pod. He does a lot with evidence-based management. And there's an article that he wrote that came out, Why We Don't Need the Whole Truth. But the gist of it is, and I thought this was a really interesting perspective because I am very much on the evidence-based train. And I think this is where I get off the train. Because, you know, the gist of it is saying something along the lines of, well, just follow the evidence, but you don't really need to pursue truth anymore. And I was like, I don't know about that, because I was always of the mind that, you know, like the whole scientific enterprise in general was the pursuit of truth. And this is where all of this quote unquote evidence comes from. And so I don't know, did you guys get a chance to look through this? Because I very much believe that we should be following the evidence where we can. But I want to make sure we don't lose the thread on the whole purpose of this exercise is to try to find the truth where it can be found.
I think that's right. We want to be as close to the truth as possible. We want to be able to have data as accurate as possible, this sort of stuff. But I think what he's arguing for is probabilities. There's a lot of things that are not necessarily black and white, and you can only model things so well. So I think he's like largely arguing for the things that like Hubbard argues for, which is essentially confidence intervals. Like, what are the odds that this is going to happen? Like, well, you know, there's a 50 to 70% chance that this is going to happen. That's not definitely going to happen. That's definitely not going to happen. It's in that's life. We don't know. There's a lot of variables around. Kind of like think of like a reorging or org design, this sort of thing. Lots of things can happen, or development rather. Like there's all sorts of variables, and like turning around that battleship. There's just so many factors that you can't account
I
for.
thought it's kind of like a 2x2 chart, because there's like, should you present things as probabilistic or should you not? And then should you pursue truth and should you not? And I'm definitely in the quadrant of absolutely present things probabilistically, but we should still be trying to pursue truth. Like I think that was where he kind of lost me.
I think it's like it depends on the decision that's being made. Like if it's high risk, it's going to change everything. If you go through this door, then by all means, be as sure as possible. But it's kind of like common traversy. Like if it's like thinking fast, thinking slow, and we want to move quickly, be agile, do a best guess heuristic sort of thing, as long as it's not going to make a big difference overall.
John, what'd you think, buddy?
God, I was thinking today when I woke up, God, if it was only an opportunity to say post hoc or go propter hoc on a podcast today, my day would be phenomenal. I understand where the two of you are coming from. His problem, or the problem he is trying to solve, I think, is very real, in that industrial psychology and HR analytics are not a black or white thing. And it's really hard, especially as a seller, by the way, to have that conversation with HR leaders. I mean, the best story, I have a minute for a story. I remember I just started in this field, and I sat down with Nancy Tippins at Valterra, and she hands me a validation study from a selection test that she had developed, or I think. And I remember she's like walking me through the pages and the sections, and I had, I've got some math background, not a lot. It's not good. I can fake it more than I really understand it, but I'm following. And we get to the correlation coefficients, and they're like 0.4, 0.39, 0.4, 0.44, I think, if I remember those numbers right. And from all that, there you go. And I'm like, okay, so this is one of the tests that failed, right? And she was looking at me like, no, this is one of the really good tests. I'm
That's
like,
fantastic.
Yeah. I think
that's that engineer coming out.
Absolutely. She looks at you over her glasses, and you're like, I was worried she was going to roll up the test and hit me with it.
She probably would too.
But when you talk to, absolutely. Oh no. I would have deserved it and appreciated the love. But people don't get that. Like managers.
Yeah.
You're right. That's the engineering side of me, right? Managers in the field, they want to know the answer. They want to know what's A or better. They don't get that HR analytics techniques are designed to improve your odds. In fact, I love that Scotty put it that way. Like, I don't, and when you buy and sell selection testing too, by the way, every selection test out there starts with find the best employees. No, it's not about finding the best employees. It's about eliminating the weakest employees, in that you will then hopefully choose the best employees out there.
Yeah, it's about reducing variance, as much as you can.
Exactly. And so I think that there is no right answer. HR isn't designed to find always the answer, to find the singular, best employee, or to make the singular best decision. It's all about improving your odds.
And it's at scale too. Like sometimes we treat correlations of like 0.10 as if they were 1.0, which clearly they're not. But to your point, like this incremental evidence at scale, like over 100,000 employees, that's a big return. That's a big return. And of course, you want to maximize your effect size, yada, yada, yada. But just getting a little bit better is way better than random choice.
Correct. So I think, though, and managers, their managers are all about evidence-based, management, because it's like, it worked this time, it should always work. Or I saw it work over here, it'll work here. So I think the intent is correct. If you see things that have success, if you see techniques that have success in the business, you should absolutely replicate them. If it worked for someone, let's replicate it. But the caveat to that is, don't think about it that way. Think about it as, I'm trying it again. Let's see if the results were the same. So, go ahead and because there isn't, as I said, there is no, you're not going to like look at this sea of data and say, here's the right answer. Let's go that way. you're going to use it to find boundaries. So if you want to practice, and this is what doctors do too, if you want to practice evidence-based medicine, that's fine. Just make sure that the bias that comes with it is it's going to work, or it still works. Make sure you're critical of the outcomes. And I think that's a safer way, I guess, not only a safer way, but I think that's how you're really going to understand what the root causes were of the solution.
And I'll give us credit that, I mean, us more than many other folks talk about the replication crisis quite a bit, and bad scientific practices and those type of things. And so
I like that. Can I steal that term? I like that. The replication crisis.
Oh, I didn't invent it. I promise you.
Come on, Cole, take credit.
Yeah, it was me. I confess.
Well,
Scott, do you want to talk about I don't know, some of the return to office stuff that we came up with?
So RTO is obviously a big topic right now. Is probably a lot of companies are going to use this upcoming holiday as the next time where they're going to, try and get people back to the office. It's been a long time coming. But essentially, most bosses regret how they mandated workers return to office. This is a Fortune magazine article here. So 80% of managers indicated that they would have taken a different approach to RTO if they had data. 50% say they had foregone a decision about return to workplace because they lacked data. And 25% said they had to make a gut instinct decision. But it's difficult to ascertain the difference between effectiveness at home and in the office, right? It's sort of like the battle we've seen between employees. But there is some evidence here. So remote workers, 10 to 20% less productive, whatever productivity means that means. That weakens morale and bonding in the office. So especially among new employees that don't get the chance to meet their coworkers, this sort of thing. But remote workers, they make more money, they're fewer expenses, less stress, more time for family. So you got this tension here, and it's a struggle going on, right? And managers are trying to do their best to get people back to the office.
This was anecdotal. I talked to quite a few people, over the last year and a half when these kind of debates were going on. One of the things I heard, not all the time, but often, and I think it might be related to this fact that, the bosses are regretting it, is at the time when these decisions were being made at many companies, bosses said, no, let's not ask our employees how they're going to react to this, because that'll imply that they have some control over whether this decision is made or not. And now they're saying, well, we didn't have the data. It's like, yeah, you didn't have the data because you didn't ask. And you didn't want to know. And now you're reaping the consequences of that and having a little bit of buyer's remorse for how you went about doing this and using your gut instinct. So well done, bosses. Good job.
Well, I think the mandate seems to be the issue here, right? It's like that lack of autonomy that you alluded to there, Cole, where it's one thing if I want to go in on my own. It's another thing if I'm told to go in. The outcome's the same, essentially, but
When I think, and there was enough data at the time. I mean, we've been covering it really closely for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It like to show the different, like, okay, is it 1 day a week? Is it 3 days a week? How is this going to impact collaboration? If you have a good people analytics function, you should know like what percentage of your workforce is already distributed, how many people have moved since, they previously were in the office, how many people joined the company since, they were remotely, and how many people is this going to impact? What is the cost structure if you needed to relocate people? All of these kind of things were knowable if you had dedicated the right things. And so I don't know. I just kind of take umbrage a little bit with like, we didn't have the data. It's like, well, if you're a small company and you don't have this kind of dedicated function, absolutely, you probably didn't have the data. But a lot of these things were knowable, again, within a probabilistic boundaries that we were discussing earlier.
I think they're knowable, at least people's perceptions. Like I'm sure almost every company large enough asked people what they felt about return to office and this sort of thing. But there's also like what employees want isn't necessarily what's good for the organization. And granted, performance and all this sort of stuff is part of your job, but it's not your total job. Is you famously said a long time ago. Like, part of your job is to be a good employee and like interact with others, spread ideas around and like this sort of stuff.
Yeah. I know, John, do you have any thoughts on this? Have you been a part of the whole
Yeah.
return to office kind of world?
Yeah. No. I mean, I've watched it all play out. I was part of it, at Amazon. I do think, I agree. I agree, Cole, with your statement. This was all knowable. I think you could have. I think everyone, or at least if you were paying attention, you predicted this was going to happen. Is that and part of it was driven by the pandemic, where people made sweeping decisions to just keep the lights on, and lo and behold, nothing exploded. So people, they took from that the answer they took from that was, oh, this is fine. So, like I have a buddy of mine from college who is an executive with a market research firm, a really famous market research firm. And he was like, we keep doing all these market research studies that say people like working from home more than they like being in the office. People think they're more productive or as productive. And he would say, I don't need to go back in the office. I'm more productive. And I'm like, do you have any idea what productive means? And there'd be this pause, and he'd be like, well, productive. So no one really had the data. The people were making decisions about what their heart felt, what the heart was, rather than what the head was. And I think organizations got swept up in that as well. They're watching CNN or CNBC, and somebody, Fortune magazine publishes a survey that they talked to and said, everybody loves working from home. The employment brand is going to have to shift. So they were, and then I think from my standpoint, companies are chasing the employment brand. We got to work from home. Everyone's got to work from home. And then they realize, almost as if a couple of IO psychologists I know were to write a paper on intentionally being back in the office. They realized that these sweeping decisions aren't generating value for the customers, aren't generating the real sustainable improvements they want to see. And I think what I would like, if we could find ways to make this more intentional, then I think you'll see less negative reaction from employees. But right now, the closest people come up with is 3 days a week, 2 days a week, X days a month. It's just we don't argue it well. But you're right, it is really hard to put the genie back in the bottle once you've already let it go. And I think that's what people are complaining about.
Well, I'll back off a little bit of what I said earlier, because like there were some people that were kind of first through the gate. It's tough being first through the gate, and sometimes you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I think for a lot of the companies that were kind of laggards, in making these type of decisions, absolutely, you've seen what other companies were doing. The funny thing to me, and I'm curious if you have an opinion on this, Scott, is how often I see people posting contradictory claims. And this is per John's point about productivity and what is productivity. A week doesn't go by where I don't see somebody put, hey, the research is settled. Work from home shows that you're more productive. And then somebody else posts, the research is settled. Working in the office makes you more productive. This can't both be true.
As far as like return to office, the intentionality is really critical. So if people are coming into the office and their teammates are not there, once again, I come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Cole comes in, Tuesday, Thursday. Why? Why would we do that? You love the free coffee. We both love the free coffee, that sort of stuff. I mean, that's not collaborative. The whole reason to come into the office, I assume, is to be, working with each other, get to know each other, smooth the workflow, generate ideas, all these sort of great things.
This is meant to be more funny than factual, but I think people forgot during the pandemic that some people just dislike their coworkers and don't want to collaborate. It's like, I don't want to be in the office at the same time as Joe. Gosh, Joe, I hate Joe.
Oh, the good old days, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
I think I think we need, I think the tools that are going to make hybrid or remote work well, they just aren't there yet. Yeah, and I do think that eventually these problems will work themselves out. But it is, everyone got lulled into a, well, it's like what Michael said. One of the Michaels used to say all the time, or it still does. Like the pandemic pushed forward our understanding of organizational networks and research by 10 years. Well, it didn't actually get us the answer. It just pushed all we did was now understand it better. I'm like, oh, that's great. I think once the tools catch up, employers will let go a little bit more than they're letting go today. But it just living off of Zoom or living off of Chime or living off of whatever, it doesn't create the relationships that you want.
We need the metaverse, right?
Yeah.
So we can all just virtually meet.
I remember doing a big presentation at Verizon. And I remember what we were selling, but that's not relevant to the story. But they had me go to this room. There was a room here in Chicago in like an office, and you walked in, and it had it was like a big conference room. It had a conference table, had seats around the conference table, and both walls were video panels. So I sat down at my seat, and of the other 8 seats, there was a full-size video of some person. And then there was a video in the center of the thing, at the center of the room, where a video screen in the center of the room where people would show presentation docs and whatever. But it really was like, it wasn't, on a little camera on your desk. It was was depictions of people right with you. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm like, okay, this is completely different. This is a different experience. And I kind of
avatars, kind of.
No, it was you. It was a full size picture of me. I can only assume I wasn't in the other rooms, but I saw a full size Cole sitting 6 feet away from me.
It's like Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars, or was it Michael Jackson at Coachella is a hologram.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's got to be. It's got to be the full. What is that called? There's a word for that. Hologram. It's got to be like full hologram before I feel like, all right, we're there. Like the technology has caught up to where we need to be.
Yeah, but it was there. This is probably 10 years ago. As I understand it, the rooms cost like $1 million a piece, so it was not something that was cheap. But it was a totally different experience for me. Like I could get up and walk around. I don't know about you, Cole. I presenting while sitting drives me crazy. Even in the same room, I'm usually the one wandering the room, waving crazy. Hey, look at me. But
the sales guy coming out.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we'll get better. I think the technology will get better. I think the metaverse is going to help somewhere. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we will. I was thinking about this while you were talking about, how the future rolls forward. There's this quote that's been used a lot because of, how the pandemic affected the future work is like, there's some times where decades where nothing happens, and then sometimes where decades happen in days. And I was researching that the other day for somebody, I was writing an article. You know who originally said that? It was Vladimir Lenin. The creator of like the, communist empire. I was like, oh shit. Well, maybe I'll quit using that one.
Well,
fun fact, there's a massive Lenin statue in Fremont here in Seattle. Like
really?
someone
an admirer
rescued it. Yeah. And like they stuck it right on the main drag in Fremont, Seattle.
A statue of Lenin.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot to our last nerdery topic, which has been surprisingly hot. I didn't even think really that much of it when it first came out. But so I was scrolling through LinkedIn the other day, and I found this post from Nick Bloom, who's a Stanford researcher who we've talked about quite a few times on the podcast before, because he does really good research on the return to office debate. But he kind of waded into a new area about, should you be paying remote workers a local salary rate or a global salary rate? And I decided to kind of put together my own post on that topic, and it just blew up. People had so many feelings because really what it comes down to is, the high cost markets like New York City and San Francisco usually have a pretty large premium on the wages that they make. And then everywhere else, has a fraction of that. And what I found in this kind of post and debate is, if you were in New York and San Francisco, you were staunchly against the global pay rate. You're like, you're going to come up with a reason. This is a bad idea. But if you were somewhere else, you're like, oh, this is great. We should absolutely, I should be getting a 20% raise for sure. But there were some interesting consequences of this discussion. Like, one person said, in the future, if this kind of thing continues and we don't have a global pay rate, companies are going to do reverse relocations. So if you're in New York, they're going to actually pay you to move to a lower cost area and do something like that. And then other people waded in saying things along the lines of like, well, what about people globally? This isn't just a US phenomena. So if we have a global pay rate, are the folks that are working in, the Philippines or Malaysia or wherever it may be, like some of these low cost countries, are they going to get like 50 and 100% raise just to get to the global pay rate? And then there was a lot of talk about fairness, like, equal pay for equal work. I think that was kind of the tagline of the Lilly Ledbetter Act a few years ago, which had to do with like gender discrimination in pay. But does that apply to geographies too? If you have, one person in New York and another person in rural Georgia and they're doing the same work, should they be getting paid the same? I don't know. This was really interesting. I was surprised how much it blew up. Do either of you have some thoughts on this topic?
I'll let John weigh in here.
What I have seen, a unmeasured trend that I am seeing in the U.S. is zoned based pay. So a number of companies, usually, I wouldn't say probably Fortune 1000, but maybe it's across even smaller businesses too, are looking at pay bands for, coasts, metropolitan coasts, Midwest, Central. At its heart, it seems reasonable to me, but I actually don't, I haven't seen the data behind it. Like I'd like to see a little more data that says that's relevant. And the reason why I'm interested in it is because it should still be consistent within the, if it still should be consistent within the zone, right? So as long as, at AWS or Amazon, I thought did this pretty well. Now their zones were, I think only San Francisco was the only other zone we had. But they, like if you were in San Francisco, you made a little extra. Everyone made a little extra on their dollars. So it makes sense to me. It just needs, I think I would like to see the data before I go for it, because that way, at least what I don't like about the global, that, kind of the statement globally, is that there still are a lot of, gradations of it. Lots of shade. This is one of those things that have lots of shades of gray, and the result that could be worse is now we have 405 pay zones, in the world, and that I think is the issue. But I am liking what I'm seeing about these companies saying, U.S. should be, 4 different zones A, B, C, D, E, and it's they're looking at the highest markets, they're looking at the lowest markets, and they're just being really open about the impact that has on your pay. But what no one says, actually, what no one says or no one's talking about yet is, you're right. What if I move? If I move, do I have to take that impact? And I guess as long as you're open about it too. I mean, this is sort of relevant to some of the, return to office things you guys are talking about. As long as you're open about, hey, we're going to pay you more if you live in San Francisco. If you move, we're going to pay you less. If that's well explained when you're taking the job, as a potential case, then a lot of my issues with it are gone. Like I do think we kind of come up with new ideas. We build the ship while sailing an awful lot, and that's where I think people get upset, less than if we were open about it at the beginning. Does that make sense?
That transparency is critical for all sorts of things that we do in organizations. I think the question arises like, why do companies pay differently in the first place? And it's competitive advantage, right?
Mhm.
If you pay the same in Iowa as you do in San Francisco, you probably get a lot of people in Iowa, but if you need people in San Francisco, probably at a competitive disadvantage there. However, like going back to our conversation about remote versus in office, if everyone is remote, then it probably should be global pay, right? You can choose to live in San Francisco, or you can choose to live in Des Moines. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But you get paid the same. There is equity issues around, if you're doing the same job for this equal pay, all this sort of stuff. But it's very nuanced, and I think it comes down to the organization's mission, vision, and strategy.
Well, and this was because John, you kind of brought this up, and somebody put this in the comments on my post about it is too. Is like a prior company I used to work for. People had this hack, which I thought was pretty clever, where they were operating in a low cost city, and they would move to a high cost city, doing like a tour of duty for the company for a while, and then move back to a low cost city because they would maintain the high cost city pay rate.
Yeah.
And so that was like their hack for dealing with this. And this seems to be something that companies are having to confront now. It's like, okay, well, I moved out of my high cost city for my remote job. Should I maintain the pay that I had, or are we going to lower their pay? And this is a very, pretty controversial subject. And I mean, I imagine I don't have the data for this, but I imagine if you reduce someone's salary pretty substantially, maybe their motivation goes down a tad bit. So I don't know.
Their engagement, yes.
Yeah, perhaps. And we already showed the relationship between engagement and job performance. So I don't know.
It's a psychological contract, right? Your pay
Exactly.
is a contract, and like you expect you get used to, I'll put
Yeah.
it that way, get used to a certain lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. Yeah, I don't know. That's I mean, this did come up during the shutdown, right? Where there was there was a big competitor of AWS. They were always in the office. They had a major hub on the West Coast. They were an in the office type culture, and then when they sent everyone home, a lot of people moved, like in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, the markets were really valuable, so people were leaving, and with no strategy to go back to the office should return to office ever show up. So in some ways, you could argue, oh, that's on the employees. They shouldn't have moved without really knowing the future, but they didn't know. But they did take that high, San Francisco Bay Area salary with them, and there were a lot of I don't actually know what happened, but I remember seeing in the paper that they were talking about reducing that for people that had quit, and there was a lot of hemming and hawing. I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good point. I haven't really thought about it in a long time. Compensation, local compensation rates. But I like what Scotty said. Where if we're gonna all be virtual, then we're gonna have a salary, and then where you live is your choice.
I will make one plug. There is a theory out there that can address this issue directly, and it's called "Everyone Gets Paid the Same." So I just want to plug that back in there a little bit. Go with the oldie but a goodie. So check that one out as well. But John, this has been a fun and meandering conversation. I love talking about hot dogs and pizzas and all the good stuff that you bring to the podcast. So before I give you the final words, Scott, any parting words for John?
Yeah, I guess it's time to live, laugh, leave. John, it's been great having you.
Thanks.
How would you rate your experience here?
This was a lot of fun. I would do it again in a heartbeat. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us, John. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott and John Izenstark. Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
As always, all opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott.